Mount Kilimanjaro. Okay, folks, again, thank you for everyone who's logging on right now and joining us. My name is Roxy Moser. I'm the Director of Immigration Services for VIMA Staffing Partners and Valley Medical Staffing. I'll just be the moderator here today. With us on the call, of course, we have our speakers. I'll let them do a very quick introduction of themselves. We have, of course, our CEO of Valley Medical Staffing and General Partner of VIMA Staffing Partners, Michael Conley. We have lead attorney at Corporate Immigration Partners. He would be the person that would be the lead on your case should you choose to work with us, Michael Hammond. And paralegal and case manager at Corporate Immigration Partners, Sarah Sheets. She's the person that answers all your questions and makes sure you cross your T's and dot your I's to get everything going for you. And of course, Sarah and I work in conjunction together with you to get your questions answered, or of course, if you need to speak with Mike Hammond. Mike Conley, you want to say hello?
Hello, how's everybody doing? My name is Mike Conley. I'm with Valley Medical Staffing, VIMA Staffing Partners. Been working here for 23 years. I was a young man when I started, believe it or not. But thank you all for taking the time to meet with us, and I hope we all learned something from today.
Forever young, Mike. Mike Hammond.
Yes, thanks, Roxy. Mike Hammond, I'm based here in Cincinnati, Ohio. I have been doing immigration mainly in two spaces, healthcare and IT, for now a little over 30 years. I started when I was 3. That's why you can tell, as you can tell, I'm only in my mid-30s. But happy to be here.
Great. And Sarah, thanks for joining.
Hey, I've been working with Vima and Valley for about 5 years now, and it's been great working with Roxy and the mics.
Mike's, that's right. Awesome. Okay. Thank you guys very much. We'll go ahead and get started. I just wanted to remind everyone who's joining us on the call. First, thank you for taking the time today. Just so you know, this webinar will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, so you can review it later or share it with anyone that might be interested. In the meantime, while you have questions during the session here, go ahead and put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to all the questions, time permitting. And with that, I just want to get started on our current webinar. We're going to talk today about the returning Trump presidency and the effects it may or may not have on EB3 visas for permanent residency and registered nurses. We'll go over, of course, those who are overseas international nurses and those who are currently living in the U.S. as F1 students or otherwise. Okay, let me, here we go. Just real brief, we'd like to introduce ourselves and who we are. Valley Medical Staffing and VIMA Staffing Partners was started in 2003, VIMA Staffing Partners shortly thereafter. We work only with acute care hospitals across the U.S. California is a very large state for us. Minnesota is another one, and we're always bringing on new opportunities. We, of course, pride ourselves in having ethical recruitment practices. And in that effort, we are certified by the Alliance for Ethical International Recruitment Practices. We are also a member of AAIHR, which is the American Association of International Healthcare Recruitment. And we are a Gold Seal of Approval Joint Commission organization as well, which speaks to the integrity of the company and the hospitals that we work with. We did a little intro to our speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to move on and let Mike Hammond start us today with our intro to what's going on.
Okay, thanks, Roxy. So as everyone probably knows, the Trump administration goes into effect next week on Monday. It's not coincidental that I'm leaving the country on Monday as well. I swear there's no connection between those two things. So let's look at what I kind of foresee going on in this administration, particularly as it relates to healthcare workers. First of all, I think it's important, as probably everyone knows, this will be a second term. He had a first term that started 8 years ago. And during that first term, he did a lot of immigration things, but he did not do anything that affected EB3, nurses, healthcare workers. So there was a lot of negative things he did during his first term relative to immigration, but none of it focused on healthcare workers. There is an expectation that the same will hold true in the second term, that the types of workers and visas and immigration agenda that is a part of his policy and some of his followers does not have healthcare in their sights. I think there's one little except that I expect. I expect that there will be it'll be more difficult for RNs to get H-1B visas because I expect a greater scrutiny in the H-1B program whatsoever across the board. It's already extremely difficult, and there are very few H-1B jobs for RNs. But for the ones that are, I expect those will be more difficult. But generally speaking, I think that the fear that some of your friends or colleagues, or if you read a lot of stuff online, the fear for people in the IT space or the IT staffing space or any of the other types of spaces, temporary workspaces, are not going to bleed over into the healthcare space. So that's, in my mind, for this industry, good news. There are two things that I think are maybes that could be extremely positive for us. And they may not look positive on the outcome. They may look irrelevant to us as we're seeing, but I want to kind of talk about those a little bit. And the first is a border bill. So when you think about a border bill and building a wall and all the detention centers he wants to have and all the other kinds of things he wants to have, you think it has absolutely nothing to do with healthcare immigration. However, the reality is that immigration tends to get attached, healthcare immigration attached to larger immigration or larger budget bills. That's historically what has happened. So when we go back 2 years ago when there was a border bill that was within a few votes of winning, there was a healthcare provision put in there that would have provided some relief to the EB3 retrogression. Now, unfortunately, that did not get passed. It did not get passed because President Trump said, I don't want to pass now. I want to wait until it's passed later so I can take credit for this. And so now is later. And so if a budget bill that is similar to that budget or a border bill is created and introduced and makes its way through, there is certainly the possibility of getting some immigration relief, healthcare worker relief attached to that. So that potentially could be a positive thing. There is also, because immigration is such a broad topic and was such a big topic in the election, that there might be some opportunity for some broader support for a broader, more what people call comprehensive immigration reform. So that is certainly a possibility as well. And then the other thing that I think is worth mentioning, because it's been in the news a lot over the last 3 weeks, predominantly from Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and the gentleman who's going to be part of his AI campaign that I cannot remember the name. But they've been talking about something called a STEM initiative, which is the idea that individuals who graduate from the U.S. master's and PhD programs who have STEM degrees would not have to go through the normal immigration priority line queue. And they've used the phrase, you've seen it sometimes in the news, stapling a green card to a diploma. That's kind of the phrase they've used. And this is actually a program that was first thought of and discussed, we're talking 25 years ago, but it has some appeal now. And at first glance, you may think, well, that has absolutely nothing to do with me. I'm not even in the U.S. I'm certainly not a U.S. PhD STEM grad, and all that's true, but here's how it would affect you. Right now, you're in a line, and the line is long. If people come out of the line, your line gets shorter. So the more people that come out of your line means you get to move further closer to the front. So if we take a certain number of U.S. master's and PhD grads and we tell them, hey, get out of the line, you don't need to be in the line anymore, that would be good for you. So it may on its surface think it has no bearing for you, but it potentially could be fairly positive for you. So I think if I were to look at the upcoming Trump administration as it relates to healthcare workers alone, I think at worst, you're going to get status quo. At best, you might could get some improvement. You might could get some change. So I think we could be looking at something potentially positive. Couple specific questions. Does Trump have the power to change the EB-3 and the H-1B? No. That's a statute. It has to be changed through Congress. It has to go through legislation in order for that to be changed. Some of these changes I've talked about could happen in the first 100 days because there's some big initiatives. However, there's also a lot of other things happening in the first 100 days. Obviously, we have a ceasefire or not in Israel-Hamas. We've got Russia-Ukraine, fires in LA. We've got flooding in North Carolina, Russia-Ukraine that he swears he can fix in 24 hours. So maybe that takes the first 24 hours, and then the rest of the week he'll have something else, more time to do other things. But there's a lot of things on the plate in those first 100 days. So will immigration be a part of it? There's a lot of people who think yes, but some of these other things may push in the front as well. I don't think anything we're talking about is going to affect petitions already filed. I don't think anything's going to affect adjustment of status cases, with the possible exception. Adjustment of status cases used to have a something called a public charge rule. The rule's still there, but the proof you had to submit changed under the first administration. Was Biden ended it, and then the expectation is Trump's going to bring it back. And essentially, it's a really long form that for those of you here in the U.S. that you have to fill out to disclose all kinds of things, including credit card debt. And it's not relevant to whether you get a green card unless you have more debt than you have income. But I will say this, for those of you who are married, I would have that conversation with your spouse if you've got credit cards and they don't know about them, because that was the number one call I got during the public charge time. Is I'd get a call from one or the other saying, hey, I'm going to send you my information, but don't let my spouse see it because they don't know. And I'm like, well, they're going to have to sign this same document, so they're going to see it. So either you have to tell them or I have to tell them, whichever you want. So keep that in mind. That's more of a nuisance to have to put together all these documents. It's not a major change.
Now, Mike,
yeah, go ahead. There was a question.
Mike, related to, I'm going to pop in and ask you a couple things here and there. Related to the public charge, that is something that may become an issue, but is not necessarily going to happen. Is that correct?
I would say it will happen 99% of the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Public charge has always been a rule. They've always required the documentation for family sponsorship. They had historically never required it for employer sponsorship, with the idea being, hey, you have a job, so we're not worried about you becoming a public charge. However, as part of their program of basically believing that every immigrant was a public charge, this was their reaction to it. And I don't recall exactly how many pages the form was, but I think it was like 8 or 10 pages and required lots of information. But yeah, I expect that to happen shortly after he takes back on, because that's a policy thing, just internal within the USCIS administration. Just like personal interviews. For the longest time, if you, again, this is only applicable to people here in the US who are doing adjustment, because if you're overseas, you always have an interview before you get your visa, before you get your immigrant visa or your green card. Here in the US, if you're doing adjustment of status, for many years you had a personal interview. And then they did away with them. And then Trump brought them back, and then they canceled them again during COVID. And Biden brought them back a little bit, but not much. Maybe right now we're seeing interviews in maybe 1 out of every 6 or 7 cases for employment based. And I think they'll get that number back up to 6 or 7 out of 7.
So how would that look for a student that, or an F1 adjustment of status case now? You're saying they should be prepared for an interview at what stage and
Yeah,
how
so
would they
after
prepare?
you file your 485, after your priority date's current in the final action date chart, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, you get a schedule at your local USCIS office. And you would go in and they go through the forms and ask you questions. And if you've got a complicated immigration history or maybe a complicated personal history, maybe you just married your spouse 90 days before they filed, maybe you and your spouse, have been divorced and then got remarried, or maybe you entered as a visitor and then switched to an F1, or maybe you've been an R, or maybe you were on TPS or DACA. So there's certain interviews that are going to be more complicated where you're probably going to need an attorney with you at the interview. There are going to be a lot of you who came in as students. You went to school, you graduated, you worked on your OPT like you're supposed to, you worked on CPT, your party date became current, you went to an interview, you probably don't need an attorney present for you. But the interviews, one nice thing about the interviews is, generally speaking, you get a decision that day. So they tell you sitting right in front of you, you are approved. You don't have to wait for any more paperwork. You don't have to sit there and wait for, when am I going to get a notice in the mail? So in some respects, that's pretty nice. In other respects, it can be a little scary, but to be honest, it's not. They're simply going through your forms, asking you questions that you already have the answers to. So it's not that bad. But I expect that to happen. Okay, next item. Effects on H-1B. I talked about that a little bit. I think it'll be tighter. For those of you who are on this call who are in the allied field, whether it be med techs, PTs, OTs, pharmacists, et cetera, I see no effect on you. But for RNs, I expect it to be a little tightening. TPS, I think right now we have 11 countries that have designated TPS or deferred action. During the first Trump term, he did not terminate any of the TPS. He talked like he was going to on a regular basis, but never did. We have several TPS coming up soon. I believe I looked this morning and there's one that's coming up in May. So I think we'll get some indication. Historically, the U.S. has done a lot of issuing of TPS. They've not done much of ever canceling them. So some of the TPS programs have begun to look like indefinite programs, but legally they're not. That's always a risk. Asylum, I think we're going to see major changes in the asylum program. Right now, if you have filed asylum in the U.S., the average processing time to get through all levels, not counting any federal appeals, is 18 years. And so most people, reasonable people, would believe 18 years is too long for a reasonable program to work. So expect a lot of, plus the ultimate approval rate on asylum cases is extremely small. We're talking in the single digits. A lot of people believe that the asylum program is simply being used as a way to get work cards. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm not here to pass judgment. But I would expect some pretty significant changes to that. DACA, I don't know. I think there's some appetite within Congress to pass a DREAMER Act. Trump has advocated a DREAMER Act. The reason a DREAMER Act has not been passed so far is that the major organizations that represent Dreamers have refused to let a Dreamer Act be passed if it did not include protections for the Dreamers' parents. And there's very little appetite on Congress to reward parents. There's a lot of appetite on Congress, and has been for 15 years, to reward individuals who came here as small children and didn't even know it and had no choice in being brought here, and have been here and gone through high school, et cetera, and for all intents and purposes are U.S. citizens. And so there's a lot of, so I believe that if the organizations that represent Dreamers would actually represent the Dreamers, then the DREAM Act would get passed. Trump has advocated on behalf of it. But again, right now, the holdback is the parents. So we'll see. But I have high hopes for a Dreamer Act that would obviously cover all of the DACA individuals. So if you're on DACA, I think good news is coming for you, likely. Asylum, maybe not so much, kind of a thing. Questions on any of those? I know those are kind of weird little topics, but they're all relevant in this space today for those of you who are here in the U.S.
Yes, I'm going to go to a question that you had, I think, referenced a little earlier, if I'm correct in assuming it's the same topic, which is the stapling of the green card. I have a question here from one of our viewers saying, I heard he'll be giving green cards to those who have studied in the U.S. in order to keep their job. Is that, can you comment on that? The second question is, how would that affect those who have filed using your agency?
Well, the program, obviously, the nuts and bolts of the program, it doesn't exist yet. It's just talk. It's on paper. But the idea that was first put forth by the Obama administration during his first term was that if you are a U.S. master's or PhD grad in a STEM field, you would get a green card without having to go through sponsorship. So it would have very little effect on RNs because RN is not considered a STEM occupation, other than the indirect effect I talked about earlier, as far as moving people out of the line, making our line shorter. But that's when they talk about stapling a green card to a diploma. That's what they're talking about. And then what was the second question? I'm sorry.
It is related to, it sounds like, how would that affect those who have filed with your agency? So,
well, potentially would make your processing faster because your retrogression line would be shorter.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it would not affect, of course, it would not affect the actual petition.
No.
One wouldn't replace the other.
Nope, not at all. One would have nothing to do with the other. It'd be no different that, yeah, it's just a new program for only those individuals that would be eligible.
Okay, well, insofar as, RNs with petitions already filed, just to reiterate this again, those who have their petitions filed, is my understanding, should not have to worry about much, with the only exception being maybe the process, of course, being affected by retrogression.
Yeah, right. And again, the Trump administration is going to have no effect on retrogression.
Right.
I mean, for there to be a change in retrogression, which we'll talk about here in a second with the state of the Visa Bulletin, but essentially, we need legislation to affect retrogression.
I would add one thing, though, and that is with the first Trump administration, the processing at the embassies slowed down. It seemed like, if someone resigned at an embassy, their position was maybe held open. So there was fewer people to process the paperwork. So that was one effect indirectly that they had to slow the process down. But the process is the process. It happens through time. It just may not be as timely.
Yes, thank you, Mike. I would also ask if we would expect to see potentially more requests for evidence or RFEs, And if that were the case, or to assuage any worries, how can we be prepared as a the attorney team to make sure those things don't happen? What advice can you give the nurse?
Yeah, we generally did not see an increase in RFEs during the first administration in this space. The most common RFEs we see are ones that are difficult to avoid, because the most common RFEs we see relate to documentation getting outdated. So if I file today, but the USCIS processing isn't looking at it for 10 months, then maybe you have maybe the tax return I filed was 2023's tax return. And now 10 months later, they want to see 2024's. From time to time, they'll go through periods of time where they'll want an eval, different than the state CGF&S ed evals. But generally speaking, in this space, RFEs are not a problem. The other thing with RFEs, keep in mind, your priority date is established when your case is filed. So the RFE does not impact how long you spend in the queue. It may, in your mind, be cause for concern, but in this space, the approval rate is about 99.999999% approval. And so RFEs are simply that. I have one on my desk right now where they wanted to clarify the internal posting. They wanted to see, it said that it was on the HR bulletin board, and they wanted to know what floor of the hospital that HR office was on. Okay, sure. We just, get a letter from the HR person that says it's on the first floor, and we send it back and they approve it. So you get some stuff that you look at and go, that seems ridiculous. That seems silly. But I mean, it is, just the nature of this. But I would not worry about that. And it was definitely not an issue during the first term.
Great, thank you. Last question before we move on to reviewing the Visa Bulletin. This is another follow-up to the potential for releasing green cards upon graduation for STEM graduates. Do you believe that those of us who are graduating in May 2025 can benefit from the promise Trump made of giving green cards to those graduating from a U.S. university?
I would be very shocked if anything is in place by 2025. Also, keep in mind, there are very few healthcare occupations that are on the STEM list. So this is primarily going to affect the people who are pushing it are the tech people, people in AI, people in machine learning, data scientists kind of field, research field, universities, NGOs are pushing it. But it's not, there's no expectation that, say, a US DPT program, that's going to be covered. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't. It's just there's no expectation right now that it is.
Okay. So basically, this is not anything that is actually happening at this point, and certainly we don't expect it necessarily to be within 4 months from now. What a registered nurse might benefit if it is something that comes into play is potentially shortening the line of waiting for your petition to go through.
Right.
Thank you for that.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to the Visa screen. Excuse me, Visa Bulletin.
Yeah. So we got February Visa Bulletin released earlier this week. And as expected, it did not move. For the last couple of years, the Visa Bulletin has only been moving quarterly. So we saw movement in January, not as much as we wanted, but we saw a little bit. We're expecting nothing this month, and that's what happened, and nothing much in March. And then so we expect the next time we'll see some movement is probably April. So a couple things to go over with the Visa Bulletin. The chart that we're seeing right here is the final action date chart. That is the chart that is the most important chart to people who are overseas, because that is when you can have your interview and be adjudicated and approved and issued a visa stamp in your passport, and you can come in. Notice that right now the Filipino line is the same as all others. Historically, they have had different numbers, with the line for the Philippines being a little slower, in some cases a lot slower. That is not happening so far. It's tracking pretty much exactly with it. The second chart, or what some people refer to as the B chart, the date for filing chart. Roxy, do you have that one up yet? Date for filing. So that chart is most important for people inside the U.S. For those of you outside the U.S., it really means nothing. In theory, it's supposed to mean something, because it's supposed to mean that the NVC can start processing your case. However, as of right now, the NVC is processing cases regardless of what that date for filing chart says, which of course doesn't mean anything because you're overseas and you're not current, but nonetheless. But for those in the US, this is the chart you care about. This chart generally, the date that's on this chart, March 1st, 2023, was set in the October bulletin, the first bulletin of the fiscal year. This date generally does not change throughout the whole year. So we expect this date to be the same unless they miscalculated. If they miscalculated, then they could move this chart forward. But assuming they calculated right, which is a big assumption, then this date will stay the same. And in theory, the final action date chart will move forward up until it meets this date for filing chart. That's the way the program is supposed to optimally work. The reason why this date's so important is that's when you can file your 485, and that's when you can file 765 and get an EAD card. So that's the date you want to focus on for those of you who are in the US and either on OPT or CPT or some other DACA, TPS, asylum, whatever status. That's the first time you can consider filing a 485. Again, we don't expect movement in March on the final action date chart, or if we do, we expect it to be really slight. But we do expect continued movement through the next 4 or 5 months. Historically, in the summer, we see what we call summer retrogression. So we see the dates get lost again. The reason why that is, I know it seems like summer's a long ways off for some of you in Minnesota, and those of you like me in Ohio and Sarah and Conley and Roxy are in warm places, so it doesn't matter to them. But the rest of us, we're freezing. And so summer seems a long ways off, but it's not that far off as it relates to the Visa Bulletins, only 3 more bulletins away. The reason why the summer retrogresses and hopefully does again this year is because we only get a certain number of green cards per year, and we work on a use it or lose it system, which means that any green cards not given out by the end of the fiscal year are lost. So let's say they give out 100 a year. I want all 100 of those to be processed and issued, right? I don't want 90, I want 100, okay? Now, for them to do that processing as much as possible, they want to process them in the first 3 quarters of the year. So the first quarter we already had, October, November, December. The February bulletin's the half of the second quarter, and then we've got 1 more quarter left. They want to process all of them then so that they don't have any left over. Last year, they had less than 5,000 left over. So when you're talking about a number in the 160-some thousand neighborhood, that's pretty amazing for the government. There have been years where they've had 40, 50,000 left over, where they were horribly inefficient. So summer retrogression just means we've used up all or almost all of the visas we have available. So we're not letting anyone else move forward. And we're going to open it up again in October. So if I'm here in the US, I'm not probably concerned too much about what the February, March, and April bulletin looks like. I'm looking toward the October bulletin again to see how far things are going to jump. So again, don't be depressed by summer retrogression. It's normal. It just means the program's working efficiently, and it'll get restored again in October. We're just hoping that we get a little more of a bump
Which
than what
also
we did
means
here.
the line has moved. So
Yes.
the more they use up those visas, the more the line is moving.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. That pretty much covers the visa bulletin. Again, I wouldn't look for movement in March. I'd look for April being the next month. And I would say it'll go till sometime in January or February is what I think will happen.
Okay. I'm gonna get comments from Sarah or Mike Conley on the visa screen or any of the topics thus far before we head to Q&A.
Do you want to take
Muted.
it away, Mike?
Mike Conley, you are muted.
Good. Yeah, no, I don't think that there's much to add. The Visa Bulletin is what it is. We just have to accept what we see when it comes out every month, and then move forward. The one thing I was going to ask Mike was, based on where the Visa Bulletin is and how much movement we're seeing, in your best estimation, if someone had their case filed today, what does the future look like for them? How long are they going to be in this process?
I have been for about the last year answering the same, which is 2.5 to 3 years.
Okay. So
And I
following
think it's pretty consistent.
Okay, so as a follow-up to that, another math example, essentially, I had a question here for a priority date that is June 2024. What might be that processing time? And please, I'm not sure if this is an overseas or onshore person, so maybe answer in the context of both.
Okay, so June 2024, I think the earliest you could see is in the October 2026 bulletin.
For the priority date becoming current.
Yeah, becoming date for filing chart. Yeah.
Date for filing. So if they were an F1 student on OPT, that is expired, they're working on CPT, maybe in October 26th, they would be able to have their I-485 filed with an I-765 to get their new permit.
That's the earliest I expect. Yeah. Yeah.
And at that point, your final action date is still further out.
Yes, that's still further out.
Right.
And again, I'm not diminishing the effect of the final action date for US-based candidates, but the reality is once you have an EAD card, you're eligible to get advanced parole, you can travel internationally, you can work, you can do virtually almost anything that you can do as a green card holder. So it's not, I'm not saying you're done yet, but you're really, really close to being done. So you have paperwork left, but you're going to make it through. The waiting is over, kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you to the mics. Let's move to Q&As. So I will start here from the, let's see. Yeah, I have an interview in February at the U.S. Embassy. Is there any chance of getting my visa with the new administration?
Well, I assume your priority date's current, or you probably wouldn't have an interview in February. And I think if, assuming you have all your paperwork together and everything else, you'll get a immigrant visa issued to you, whether it's the new administration or the old administration, or the administration 10 years ago. So yeah, I see no reason for alarm over this new administration in your situation whatsoever.
It's great. Good news for the anonymous nurse that entered that question. Thank you for sending it. Let's see. I ran out of OPT for my previous degree. Is there any way to sponsor the direct MSN to RN graduate without OPT? Mike Conley, what say you?
I'm a little confused by the question, honestly. Um, if you run out of OPT, there's always the opportunity for you to go into a program that offers CPT. And so, yes, if you get into a program that offers CPT, um, there's there is opportunity for you to get sponsored and have somebody process it. The problem is you got to remember this is now taking a long period of time. And so you get into a new CPT program that allows you to get hired and start getting sponsored. You might graduate from that program and then need to look for some other opportunity to provide additional curriculum practical training. I think we've seen that a lot in tech, where people just keep getting all sorts of advanced degrees. And it could be something that we're going to start seeing in nursing as well. You know, an MSN, maybe an executive MBA with a healthcare focus, things like that, in order to stay in status, employable, and get through the sponsorship.
Great.
One thing I would
and that-
add to that particular person, Roxy, is
Mhm.
how long ago did your OPT expire, and what are you doing now? Are you already back in a master's program? If you are already in a master's program now, your prior program was a bachelor, so now you're one level higher, you're going to be eligible for a new OPT if you don't use a full year of CPT. So there, depending on where you're at in your program, there might be some strategy needed. So it's very fact specific. So I'd reach out to Roxy and let her talk to you about your particular circumstances, because it sounds like you might have some options.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's a very good point. Our team at Vima and Valley will always take the time to discuss OPT and CPT situations or otherwise for work authorization. We always help you plan for those and also have a lot of resources that will help folks, manage the need for the work authorization. Just to follow up to a work authorization, another user asked, does your agency accept F1 students with an expired visa but a valid I-20? I-20 being, of course, part of your OPT or your school program, excuse me.
I can answer that. Expired visas mean nothing. Visas have absolutely nothing to do with status. So there are a lot of people, depending on what country you're from, where you're only given a visa for the period of time for the right around your very first entry of school. So school starts for you in August 2024. You may only be given a visa for 30 days from August 1st to August 30th, and that's it. So it's your I-20, and you're actually being in school and fulfilling the terms of your I-20 that make you legal. Your visa is what allowed you to enter legally and allows you to travel legally, but has absolutely nothing to do with your legal status. And so Vima, or frankly any other employer, doesn't care what your visa situation is like.
Right. And the I-20, is your school administrator will help make sure via your I-20, say for instance on CPT, that you have valid work authorization. And if you were to work with Vima or Valley, you likely be looking or surely looking for a day one CPT program or a master's program for CPT that allows you to work full time. Mike Conley, did you want to add anything before we move to the next?
I think that you've covered it there.
Great. Okay, I see one question from someone asking real briefly. We are recording this session and it will be posted on our YouTube channel after the rest of our questions. And if you don't get your question answered, do go ahead and email us at careers@vmstaffing.com or reach out to me at R like Roxy Moser at vmstaffing.com and we'll get your question answered. Okay, so let's see. We're going to move on to another priority date question. My priority date is November 2023. Is there a possibility it will be current within the end of this calendar year, 2025? Mike Hammond.
If you are offshore, I'm going to say no. If you're in the US, could the date for filing chart move from March to November next October? That would be an 8-month jump. I think that's unlikely. So I would put quite a bit of money on no. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Related to employers and visa sponsorship, Anonymous says here, do you think that they won't make it to March 1st, 2023, the Visa Bulletin? Do you think employers abandon employees because of the wait? It's a very good question. We don't.
Yeah, I mean, I'll chime in. I represent staffing agencies and direct hire agencies like Valley and Vima. I also represent hospital systems. And I have seen zero abandonment or even discussion of abandonment at this point in time. Keep in mind, retrogression did not just all of a sudden get invented a year ago or come out of the blue and take people by surprise. We've had the concept of retrogression for 25 years. We had a couple of years where we had aberrations with no retrogression as a result of COVID. For those who've never been in the industry and you're as a nurse only and your experience with the industry is 2022, 23, 24, the history of it's irrelevant to you. It doesn't matter. It didn't matter. But when hospitals look at at international recruitment programs, they're well aware of the aberration that occurred and what was going to happen going forward. This is not a surprise at this time frame. I'm seeing no softening of the market right now at all. So good news.
Mike Conley, do you want to say anything about the employer sponsorship?
Yeah, we've never abandoned anybody, never would. You've heard some little stories in the background about it happening. It usually tends to be something very specific to that facility or, something that's going on that's very, very specific. It's not a general theme whatsoever. So I just don't think getting abandoned is anything that you should be worried about, and it's specifically you shouldn't worry about it at all with our firm. I mean, if we're doing a direct hire for you, and we get to the end of the line and the client doesn't want you, we'll step in and recapture your priority date and make sure that you are taken care of. So, we'll backstop that for you. Because there's nothing worse, and we've done it before. We've hired nurses that got abandoned in the past, and it was heartbreaking. So that's nothing that we would ever do.
Great. Mike Conley, I'm going to have you take this next question also. Can you explain to a F1 nursing student if they use their 1-year OPT while processing the sponsorship, what should they do and how can we, Vima or Valley, assist them in that process?
Yeah, so I mean, it's happened a lot in the last couple of years. We've hired a lot of new grads who have gotten caught up in retrogression. Um, so previously, especially during the pandemic, we'd hire a new grad, we'd file their I-140 and their I-485 concurrently, and they'd get a work permit in 4 to 6 months, and Bob's your uncle. Um, since then, since we've gone into retrogression, uh, you're going to find that you're going to use all your OPT, and you're not going to be any closer to what you think is the end than when you started, because you can't file that I-485 until your priority date is current. And so what we've done is we've come up with support for those people. We have some different programs that we work with to help folks get into a master's program that offers day one CPT. Um, and that allows them, I don't mean to be crass, but allows them to buy time, because that's really what you're trying to do, is you're trying to buy the time that's necessary to stay in status and keep working until your I-485 is eligible to be filed and you can get your work permit. It's something, it's what we do. It's baked into our program to help people stay in status, keep working, and get to the finish line.
Great, thank you.
Bet.
Another one for you, Mike Conley, related to Vima and Valley in particular, for where we are hiring for. User asks, are you planning to get hospitals again in California?
We have hospitals in California that are hiring. We're placing nurses in California all the time. So that's not an issue.
Great. Okay. So for anyone who's interested in a state like California or otherwise, the best, of course, way to learn more about those opportunities is to apply online at vimastaffingpartners.com or vmstaffing.com, excuse me. And then our recruiters will speak to you about those opportunities. But in addition to California, hospitals we are currently placing in Minnesota, or other opportunities are always coming on. So definitely make sure to do check back. And things change over time, and waiting for, retrogression in your priority date. You'll also see over time some different opportunities come along. Okay, so how soon after signing an offer letter until you file the I-140? Mike Conley.
Yeah, that's mine. Again, it depends. If you're an adjustment of status case, you're going to have to be working before we get the I-140 filed. And that's specific to the government's requirement to show ability to pay. If we have a pay stub showing you're working, that's how that's met without any problem. Just strengthens the case and makes it super easy. So that's for an adjustment of status. Offshore, if you sign an offer letter, we sign an offer letter with you, contract sign, Roxy submits you to Sarah and Mike, and it's just gathering the documents and filing case. We try and do it as soon as possible because we want to get the priority date. That's the most important thing. You're not going to get here unless you get in line. And so the priority date is your spot in line. So, we try and get that done as quickly as possible for our folks offshore.
Great, thank you. At this juncture in the hour, I'm going to wrap it up with just another quick mention that if you didn't get your question answered, go ahead and email us, careers@vmstaffing.com, or apply online and discuss your questions with a recruiter. This webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel, so do feel free to review it or share it with a friend. And then just to wrap up the topic of today, what last words can you offer us, each of you, about the nurses on this call or otherwise that are interested in visa sponsorship and the next 4 years of the new administration? Mike Conley, yes.
Yeah. Before I do that, though,
Yeah.
I saw a good question. which was, do you accept newly graduates of the Philippines who have passed NCLEX, but they haven't started or don't have any hospital experience yet? They want to secure a priority date, and then work and get their experience while they're waiting that 2.5 years. Absolutely. Absolutely. I tell people sometimes that retrogression has given you the gift of time in the sense that you can craft your career over that 2.5, 3 years while you're waiting. If you want to come to the United States and be an ICU nurse, get a job in an ICU, maybe go to the Middle East or Europe and work as an ICU nurse there. This gives you an opportunity to craft what you want your career to look like when you come to the United States. So yes, absolutely. Now, anything to add? It will be very interesting to see what happens with the Trump administration. It can be somewhat erratic and chaotic. If we can look to the past. The difference I see this time is there are some folks who were in the tech world who are very highly aligned to the president, a major financial sponsors of the president, and huge supporters of legal immigration. I think that they are going to be working with the president to figure out ways to improve our legal immigration system. The illegal immigration system, that is something that is going to be dealt with border bills and deportations and all this nonsense. But there are powers that be that care a lot about legal immigration to make America great again. So I think that, if we just keep our eyes open and see what's going on. And if there's bills that are coming, we belong to lobbying groups to try and, put forward our agenda in legal immigration. So I think that we have friends in this administration with regards to legal immigration.
Great, well said. And Mike Hammond, what would you add to that?
I would say the biggest thing that I would say right now, and I've been saying this for a little while, is to control what you can control. There are certain things, whether it be continue to get bedside experience, whether it's pass your English exam so you can get your visa screen, whatever that is within your power to control, focus on that and control it. We've had this program, Schedule A RN programs now I've been involved in them now almost 25 years. And they've taken sometimes longer, sometimes less, but they always get to the end. That is what history tells us. And so don't view all these obstacles as I'm not going to make it. View it as I'm being delayed, or I have a challenge, but I can overcome that challenge. I can now do this. So control what you can control, and I think you'll be fine.
Great, thank you. And Sarah, I'll let you close us out with just a couple words of encouragement for our nurses on the call.
Yeah, if you guys ever have any questions or concerns, or you're worried about anything, definitely reach out to us. Whether we currently work with you or you're thinking about applying to Visa Valley, we're always here to help. We're quick to respond. Roxy and I normally, we'll tag team on an email if there's something she can't answer or if I can't answer. We're always here to assist. So don't be afraid to ask questions and reach out to us.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to the mics. And thank you for everyone who's on the call, whether or not you're a current nurse under sponsorship or working with us, or you're interested. We really thank you for joining and spending the time with us. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks.
Take
Bye.
care.